Thank you so very much. We say welcome to everyone. Welcome to this amazing opportunity for us to get a chance to talk a little bit about what is happening in our community. And as we all often said, these are your change agents. This is a conversation about change, right? Given the fact that we have new administrations, we have new leadership, not only locally, but also at the national level. We thought this was such an important time for us to talk a little bit about what will change means. What does that mean for us, not only here, not only in the country, but also what does that mean for us here locally? I am super excited to be moderating this conversation with some really, really amazing, amazing ladies and friends of our school. Which has really been focusing, as you know, our School of Education is focusing on promoting educational, psychological and physical well-beings in multicultural communities. And what better way for us to get a chance to kick such a conversation, but to act with us. Our amazing mayor, our new elected mayor of Miami-Dade, Mayor Cava, is with us. Super excited because she gets to make her story. You know, she is making her story here in Miami, and super excited to have you. Been a long-term friend of the school, and so we're happy to have you with us. We are also very excited to have our very good friend over at the law school, Osamudia James, who's joining us this evening for this conversation. So always great to see you. And then, of course, we have our amazing trailblazer doing everything powerful in the community. Miss Carrie Ann Royals is here joining us, right, with Art of White WCA. So we are excited because we've been having a conversation, all of you, as you know, as we're looking at some of the things that are happening in the country. And as we're looking at what some of the pandemics that we have, both with the pandemics of COVID, the pandemics of racism, what has that taught us? Right. And so this is an opportunity for us to say, what are some things that we're learning and what are some things that we should never go back to? Because the pandemic shows us some things that we may have been comfortable with, right? But the pandemic allowed us to actually break those barriers. So this is a great opportunity for us to engage in that conversation. So one of the first thing I wanted to do to kick this off, and I'm not spending the time to do the bios because you guys are amazing individuals and everybody going to, Google you and they'll find out all the things they need to find out about you, right? So that we can really go straight into the conversation because I know our mayor can only be with us for a short period of time and I want to make sure that we're maximizing on her time with us. So one of the things that people have been really talking about is this sort of need for unity, as we heard our elected officials talking about this concept of unity, the time for us to come together as a nation, time for us to come together as people, as a society. So I would love to hear your thoughts first about what you're thinking about this word. What does that mean for you? So we're gonna kick it off with our mayor, Mayor Cava. What are your thoughts about this concept of unity?
Well, what a pleasure to be with this amazing group of people. And I'm sure everyone listening is very impressed that Professor Nicholas has brought us all together. I am thrilled because it's like homecoming for me. I cut my teeth on the change work being done at the University of Miami with Dean Laura Cohn-Wood and Gerda Nicholas. So exciting. And I work in the community with the others. So just say thank you. You know, we come together in times of difficulty. The challenges create opportunities. The common enemy creates unity. The common enemy is COVID. So we have seen during this pandemic that the whole community is affected, that it hurts everybody when our health is at risk and so many are vulnerable. And also we had the murder of George Floyd in broad daylight in front of the world at a time when we were all watching. We were all watching. So that peels back the blinders on people's eyes for what we knew to be the truth, the disparity, the degradation, the disparagement, the worst that has happened to communities of color in this country. So I do think that it's the conditions, the moment in time, which creates the opportunity for us to say, you know what, we have more in common than not, and we're not proud. We're not proud of this legacy, and we see people suffering. We see people who never have been dependent upon charity, depending on the kindness of strangers. So this is the moment to exploit, to double down, to not allow division to resurface, and to remind, because it's already been a year. So some people's memory is already fading of the horrors of this. So this is our moment to build forward in a more unified way.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to turn over to Carrie Ann. Your thoughts on the.
Thank you so much for that, Mayor, also, because I think you made a really great point in regards to unity. It's also that when there is that common denominator that brings us all together, whether it's a hurricane, right? When there's a hurricane, I know every neighbor on my street. We share meals together. We take what's out in the fridge to make sure nothing spoils. You put your food in other people's refrigerators. You've never known your neighbors like that before. But when the storm passes, which is where we're moving towards, and I think now that we're looking at the storm passing, the unity that we require when we look at, one, our perspective of what's happening and not allowing the light to go, because we're a very insta society. We like what's the order of the day and what's happening now, and then we move on to the next thing. I mean, you just said it. People are bored of COVID. They're literally bored of COVID. And therefore, we're beginning to forget those things that have bound us together these last 12 months. And it's what's going to happen past the storm that's important. How we're keeping the lights on and the doors open on the issues that matter. And I will say, the mayor, your Office of Racial Equity is exactly what will keep the issue at the forefront. It's what we do when the storm has passed, to have sustainable solutions that drive unity after the big storm happens and we're all kind of over it. So I think unity requires that sustained effort, and that means economics, gender, and racial justice, as well as other issues that must coincide.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. Awesome. Professor James, you want to jump in there? Yes.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So when I think about unity, I think about two things. One is that although it sounds good, I think that we have to be careful not to elevate unity above the dignity, the support, the care for particular communities, right? And so if unity means that the needs of Black communities are going to be ignored, right, or compromised in the search for something that's going to make everyone feel better, I prefer not to have unity. And I think it's important to think about, when we're unifying, what we're unifying against, even, right? Not so unity doesn't always mean that everyone can be in that united front. Sometimes you have to come together and say, these are our values, right, as a community, and we are coalescing against another set of values that are not helpful for our democracy. And so what comes to mind is the insurrection on January 6th, right? Unity does not mean everyone who participated in that or encouraged it, right, or facilitated that uprising for weeks and weeks gets to be forgiven and we move forward, right? That's not unity. Unity is us understanding what happened, the dynamics that led to that, holding people accountable, and then moving forward towards something that's better. And so that's what I think about. The other thing I think about with unity is the way in which identity in general and race in particular is used to drive a wedge in unity, right? Or to divide us in very explicit ways. And so I do think that race for a long time, but particularly over the last 4 years, was used to wedge us, right? And voters responded to that. A lot of people are uncomfortable with race talk, and and we're happy to vote against interests that were best for us because they were hanging on to the way race was being used to divide us. And I do think if we have to move forward together, then policymakers, educators, politicians, we will have to get better at explaining to people that race is what has been used to divide us. But if we could get past that, we could unite and get something better for all of us, right? Economic solutions, healthcare solutions, immigration solutions, they've all been obstructed because people have used race to turn us against each other in those areas, right? If you could get voters and people to understand that, they can be like, oh, wait a second, this is being used to undercut my own interests, right? And if I could get past that, then we could pass economic solutions, healthcare solutions, that would be good for everyone. And so being savvy about how we get to unity and being clear-eyed about how race has been used to undercut unity.
That's really great. Thank you so much for that. And I think all of you have touched upon, as you were talking about this concept of unity, but also highlighting a lot of the disparities that some of these pandemics have really highlighted, right? So we've had an opportunity to see with a spotlight on disparities in education, disparities in economic, right? Disparities in health in such a significant way. So I would love to hear your thoughts around what you think this newness, new mayor, new president, new vice president, right? All of this historical moment. What do you think are some of the changes that we should expect to see, right? Given some of these new developments that we have. So I'm gonna kick it off with Carrie Ann, since we started with the mayor first. I'm gonna kick it off with Marianne and go to Mayor Kava.
Sure. So I think with a new administration always comes these dreams of what's gonna happen next. And obviously, many of us have struggled with some of the divisiveness that the previous administrations have allowed to bubble to the surface. So I think one of the things that is very exciting for me, and I'll just stay there and give everyone else time because there's so much exciting stuff, is the level of representation that we're seeing that is being put to the forefront, right? We're seeing aside from the fact that we have Kamala in her seat, our vice president, and that representation, you saw thereafter that the president was not shy about the fact that he was serious when he was talking about representation. Pete Buttigieg, we have Janet Yellen, we have Deb Haaland, that he continues to show that he's going to put the power of his privilege behind representation because representation matters. Representation at the table allows us to make decisions from different vantage points and to allow everyone to have a voice at the table. So I've seen that happen but I'm going to leave that to the mayor to talk about as opposed to me talking about what she's done. But we're seeing that representation matters and that the people in power are actually using their power to open the doors and create stability of the place at the table with that representation, which makes sound business sense, sound cultural sense. And if you prepare for the people in the margin, it's good for everyone. So excited about that.
Awesome. Mayor Kava, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's true that we are seeing in this administration appointments that are unprecedented. And, I'm going to talk a little bit about something my rabbi told me, that when there are these cataclysmic shifts in the power structures in society, the old order holds on so tightly. And that's what we see with white supremacy in this country. It's like so afraid of the emerging reality, so afraid of the emerging demographics, so afraid of loss of power and privilege. So, our democracy is strong. We survived an insurrection that on the one hand was overwhelming and horrifying, and on the other was clearly not at the level that would truly threaten our nation. And it's because the new reality that's emerging is the reality. You cannot deny the reality. So you either acknowledge it and work with it, or you try to bring it down. And of course, the efforts to bring it down will not succeed. So, on the local level, the same thing. On the local level, whenever, power does not give up without a fight. We know that. So that's what I see. And I see people of goodwill across the aisle, people of goodwill across different communities, not only acknowledging the change, but embracing the change. So that's where I feel most hopeful.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yeah, Professor James.
I think I agree with both of my co-panelists. Change can be very destabilizing, and even just the representation in the cabinet, right, has got people rattled, right? It sort of shakes beliefs about who should be in charge, what power should look like, right? Who gets privilege. And so I think we are going to continue to see pushback to that in various forms, but right, this seems like an administration that is committed to also moving forward in ways that have real substantive impact. I think that there are two ways that the administration at the federal level is going to operate. One is to sort of try to undo, right, the previous administration's legacy. The other is to try to move forward, right? And so a lot of the executive orders were about sort of undoing practices of the last 4 years, changing immigration priorities, bringing science back into decision making, things like that. And then some of it is, how will this administration move forward, right? A minimum wage for $15 at the federal level, finally getting comprehensive immigration reform, trying to broaden access to healthcare. And so I think we're going to see, it'll be a little bit of both, right? Undoing, trying to get back to a place of normalcy or as close to as possible, and then trying to move forward from that with bold action. And I do think that at both the state and federal level, there are risks to be taken there, right? People, like I said, change is destabilizing. And so if politicians move forward too quickly, sometimes you get backlash from that, right? And the question is, well, is it worth it to move quickly and forcefully and get changes in that will be harder to take away later, right? Or do we play it safe in the hopes that we can sort of retain a small but steady progress forward? And so, it'll be interesting to see how policymakers respond to the next couple of years.
That's really great. And thank you for that. And so as you guys were talking, I'm wondering if we can bring it home a little bit. And so we've been sort of talking about it sort of like at this national level. And I know, Mayor Carver, we only have you for a few more minutes here, but I would love us to bring it home and imagine, what is this going to look like here? How are we going to manifest this here in South Florida, in Miami, where our school is, our community grassroots organizations are? What do you envision? And I would love, since I know you have to leave, Mayor Carver, if you could talk a little bit about how you see that kind of partnership with some of the things that you are interested in between our grassroots community organizations and our universities like ours, and our school like ours.
Well, you've got University of Miami, and through your programs and others, Dr. Bakken has been in touch with me. You're really at the forefront of talking about these issues of equity and unity. And of course, University of Miami is a global institution. It is, and that's one of the great strengths, I think, of Miami-Dade, is that we are a global community. So what we have to really always remember is to honor those who came before and honor our history and our legacy. This has been very much in the news when we talk about tech coming to town. And there's this buzz about lifestyle in Miami, and that's great. We want people to come, but not at the expense of the people who are here and who have contributed and who have so much to offer, but they haven't had those opportunities. So how do we assure that that pipeline builds on our natural talent pool, on our creativity, on our drive and ambition? We're like the most entrepreneurial place in the country, but we don't have the resources, the support, the technical assistance, the commitment to help our local grow. We're sort of like, like a throwaway economy, like, okay, we'll get you a little startup and then you're on your own. not, we really lift you up, and especially with these new opportunities. So I think it's been really exciting that as new industries are coming, that there's a lot of conversation about how to make sure that it lifts up our local community, and that the rising tide will lift all boats. That's always been the mantra. And again, when there's growth, this should be the time, right, that everybody gets a shot. Everybody gets a shot. So I really appreciate what you said, Carrie Ann, before, that the fact that we're creating this Office of Equity and Inclusion is exactly to do that. I mean, it's been, you got to put your money where your mouth is, right? So during my campaign, it was said by my opponent that he didn't see racism in county government. Well, hey, hello, I'm here to tell you that, of course, there's racism in county government. There's racism wherever we are. There's disparities wherever we are. And it's on us to call it out and lift it up. And by calling attention, by making it front and center, and making it a normal part of conversation, not shying away from it. So I think that's what we're at. I think the new normal is the new aware normal, the new conscious normal, the new transparent normal. Anyway, that's my plan.
That's awesome. And we're going to go to the other person in a minute. I wonder, as you talk a little, I know you got to go, but I wanted to say, I know you have to leave us, and thank you so much for joining.
I'm sorry for the short shrift here,
we are
but
so,
more time for
so
these
honored.
other great speakers. That's what it is.
It was so awesome to see you, and we're very much looking forward to the office. We're working with the Office of Equity and Inclusion, getting our students involved, getting.
Yes, exactly. Well. And one other, Office of Community Safety and Office of Civic Innovation. Now, if that is not exciting, you shouldn't be in this conversation.
Those are really, really great. So
yes,
you let us know, because I know you have this survey out on civic education.
Oh, yes.
Right now also. So it's a great opportunity to get.
Thank you.
Input, right?
Yeah, and we need everybody to fill it out. We are at about 18,000, which is unprecedented. Thrive305.org. Yes, ma'am. Thrive305.org. And it is available in 3 languages. It's a 10-15 minute, depending on how long you take to answer those questions. But we really want to hear from everybody. And we're going to be having civic town halls. So stay tuned, sign up, and participate, because it's an owner. We're going to be an owner government. You own it. How's that?
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Sorry to leave so early.
See you. Thanks for making the time. Really
you bet.
Appreciate you being here.
Very good. Bye-bye.
Bye. So we thank you so much. It was wonderful to have the mayor here, because it really is important to hear what's happening at the county level in terms of her office that she set up to really create a level of accountability and so forth, right? So I would love to hear you guys' thoughts around how do you see this issue, because we're talking about what's happening at the national level, but a lot of these things also are very much here, going home here in Miami as well. So love to hear your thoughts, Carrie Ann, around what are you thinking about how you see some of this work being manifest itself here in South Florida.
I think what I'm most excited about seeing, and I think she mentioned this just a little bit, but I'm most excited. There's been this renewed energy around Miami right now, right? Touched on some of the tech stuff. There are a lot of people who were kind of over their crowded environments because of COVID, leaving those cities like New York and other really dense metropolis, saying that they're going to move to South Florida because they can kind of enjoy. We've had this, I don't know if you've recognized, our housing market is at pretty much a standstill again, like it wasn't worse before, but there's no stock on the market. I know 3 people who want to buy homes that they can't find a home to buy because there is this magnetic force that we have kind of self-created in South Florida. And that is exciting, but we have the economic pipeline for the people who are here and to see value in what they are offering and have been offering to South Florida this entire time. We've done this before. We've done this before with gentrification and other things that have come to South Florida that outside Florida have been able to come and take advantage of. So we are, especially at YWCA, we're incredibly focused on economics right now. One, because we're a race and gender justice organization, and who was left behind in this entire COVID crisis, right? Women of color, we know, were the hardest hit. They were either had one or two choices. They had to go to work because they were the people who care for us, or they were losing their jobs because they were hourly workers. That was the choice. That was the juxtaposition. We're seeing women leave the workforce. We know that single parents, especially moms, are staying home and having that having no choice. So we are squarely focused here in South Florida on making sure that women of color are not left behind, that they have opportunities to upskill and to retrain, and to make sure that we're respecting their needs and lived experience and their value that they're bringing to the table with that lens that no one else is going to bring. So removing, making sure that they have all of the soft skills, making sure that, frankly, our corporate environment is ready for them. They have some work to do too. So how this shows up locally is a huge collaborative method of everyone recognizing their responsibility in making sure that the economic fabric of South Florida can thrive in this next generation post-COVID.
That's really awesome. That's really awesome to hear, because as you said, this piece around economic, as you're talking about, and even as the mayor was talking about this piece around like the whole tech company coming in, right? And I was excited to hear her also mentioning how such a thing can also create more disparities, right? Because one of the things that COVID had taught us is how digitally literacy is an issue, right? So we have a digital divide, right, as well. And so by virtue of doing so could absolutely bring a level of disparities as well. So paying attention to these things is so and so important. I really appreciate what you just said, Karen. Thanks so much for that. Professor James, your thoughts about South Florida? I know, I can see it bubbling over there.
No, I have to agree that economics is a big one, and some of the moves at the federal level also impact us here, right? So moves to have an eviction moratorium, moves to put a moratorium on student loan payments, right? Those are issues that resonate even bigger in South Florida, right? In an area where income inequality is one of the widest in the country, if not in the world. And so I think the economics of all of this, right? Trying to get everyone to a level where it's sustainable, the minimum wage going up eventually to $15 in 2026 is huge, to give people an opportunity, if they work full time, can support themselves and their family. So that's a huge one. And I think keeping our eye on making sure that even as Miami becomes a new, second Silicon Valley, that we don't leave people behind, because we saw how quickly people were left behind on things as simple as Wi-Fi access for school, right? So that's one issue. The other big issue I think here is climate change, right? It doesn't seem to be a lot of conversation about it, but the federal government is thinking about it. We entered the Paris Climate Accords, we re-entered, right? We're stopping drilling, the Keystone Pipeline permits were revoked. And so there's an attempt to, again, sort of try to get us back to a place of stability, to think harder about how we move forward given climate change. And so, I think I know at the federal level, the plan is to make sure something like 40% of sort of revenues from clean energy sources are invested back into underserved communities, put back into low-income communities. And so my hope is that politicians in Miami would mimic that behavior at the local level, but also get access to the sorts of programs that are going to help funnel money from our clean and renewable energy programs into this area. And if you think about places that are going to be more desirable as climate change changes the coastline and what's livable, right? It is Black and brown communities, right? It is Overtown, Little Haiti, right? Places where Black people were confined earlier now is going to be desirable because it's on higher ground, right? And so thinking about equity as we move towards dealing with climate change and trying to maintain a sustainable environment, making sure that even in that movement, we do not run the same story that we always do, which is we're going to push low-income people, we're going to push Black people, we're going to push brown people out, and the benefits of that change will go primarily to the upper class and white people. So
that's so interesting. You said this, Professor James, because last Saturday we hosted a day of dialogue with a number of our community partners, right? That brings in our youth organizations and those who are working with geriatric. They really span the gamut, right? So from health to education to economic. So it's organizations coming together. And the theme of our conversation was around the sick system, right? It was really looking at what are the issues that are happening at the systems level that may be impacting, right, our communities of color here in South Florida. So one of the things that a young man said, it was a high school sophomore student said, that a high school sophomore said that one of the things he noticed about COVID is that as a result of COVID and being home, most of his classmates, including himself, did not get suspended, right? So as a result of that, his academic record did not get tarnished as a result of that, right? So not much has changed in terms of, right, a whole lot of stuff, but it allowed us to see there are these systemic issues as we're talking about the economic, as we're talking about the health issues, as we're talking about these other things, there all seem to be some structural things here in Miami or here in South Florida that yes, you can have a new mayor. Yes, you can have a new president. You can even bring in a new governor, but there are these structural things that require us to pay attention, right, to them. So I'm wondering your thoughts, right, from both, you know, Professor James has done extensive work with understanding structures, understanding systems, and Carrie, you live it, you know, on a day-to-day basis on the ground. And I'm wondering your thoughts around what are the steps, what are the ways that we as entities that are both within the School of Education and Human Development, we have our School of Law, we have our grassroots organization, and a mayor office who said, I'm creating an office of equity, an office of civic innovation, community. How do we, like, collectively see these as an opportunity to address some of those systemic issues? What are your thoughts, Carrie?
Wow, I was hoping you were going to go to Dr. James before me on that one. And I think what you're talking about is collective impact, right? If I were to liken it to some of what I've heard or what I've seen, and we always talk about collaboration and we always talk about collective impact. But the truth is that collaboration and collective impact requires you to be unselfish, and it requires you to put your ego aside, and it requires you to play your space and to allow others to play their space, and to ensure that there is to hold up for all to see that it can't work without all the pieces, right? What I found sometimes in our piece in South Florida is that we like the gloss and the sparkly and the attention and all the lights. And we get into the lights and attention quite a bit and lose focus on the issue. So when I have conversations with corporations about where to start, and I find that this is very much like this, but just a scaled up level. We talk about starting with the data. That racism and systemic racism is not about personality, because most people, when you call them racist, they or say that the racism exists, I probably think that's what the mayor was talking about when she said that someone said the previous whomever said that there was no racism in government. They were talking about this personal characteristic of you discriminating against other people. And that's not what racism is built on. It's built on a power dynamic. So, and oftentimes we make what we think to be greatly this perpetuate the power dynamic that disproportionately affects people. So when you remove this personal factor and you look at what are all these greatly informed decisions that we've made, how has that affected people in health, in education, in transportation, in whatever those things are. And you start saying, oh my God, why did that happen? Because this wasn't built to make that happen. And then you start to pull that apart. To pull that apart requires all the people. It requires the nonprofit. It requires the government. It requires the civic groups. It requires corporations who are major influencers. And it requires a small business owner who's 90% of our industry. So I think if we start by not thinking about ourselves, but focusing on where we have landed and what the outcomes and the data tells us, then we will more intelligently be able to respond to who needs to be there for the solutions and not make it about what have we done and how do we do it next, and who should we invite in. Start with the facts. Start with how systemic racism has impacted our people in South Florida. And when you see the truth, then we need to act on it with all the players at the table.
Awesome. That's awesome. I love it. I love it. Professor James.
My co-panelists cannot be more right that there are systems in place that if tomorrow everyone lost all their racist sentiment, right, or their sexist sentiment or the homophobic sentiment, the system would keep working to disenfranchise the same people, right? And so we think about education and we adopt policies about suspensions and discipline, and we see that when Black children don't have to be in the building, right, those policies are not subject to them. It actually creates space for learning, right? And so, and that's not about, look, it might be about teachers, right, who look at Black children or brown children and think less of them, right? That's definitely some of that, but there's also a way in which should we have, you know, school suspension policies, right? How does that structural intervention work to disenfranchise the same children over and over again? The very idea that you would kick people out of school in a society where we have unconscious biases and sometimes conscious biases, who is that going to work to harm? We think about voting. And the ways that state legislatures have been gerrymandered, right? So that no matter how many people come out to vote, no matter what your get out the vote system is, right, you do not get people in Congress who represent the voters, right? And so, you know, Biden won more, you know, by pretty wide margin, the popular vote, but he got 25 states to Trump's 25 states. Before that, Trump got 30 states to Hillary Clinton's 20, even though she won the popular vote there, right? So that says something about what sort of voting structures do you have in place that are going to make it that when the people come out to vote, they will not get what they're looking for, right? And who's going to be harmed by that disproportionately? That's going to be communities of color. We think about health, right? And right now, how we are distributing vaccines, right? We know that if you create systems where someone has to get on the internet with 3 screens at the open time, right, to make an appointment and get there, who is going to be able to get those appointments, right? These are going to be wealthier people, often white people, people with internet savvy, people who have jobs that allow them to sit at a desk for a couple hours and see if they can game the system and get a vaccine that's available, right? Vulnerable communities are not going to get that. You can implement your vaccine distribution policy without a racist thought in your mind. But if that's the structure you pick, you will disenfranchise the same people. And we're seeing wealthier, whiter areas are getting vaccines, right? And more vulnerable areas, working class communities, communities of color are not, right? Because they don't have access to the structure of the system that you set up. Same thing with incarceration, same thing with policing. And so I do think you're right to say that, right? A school of human education, human development, law schools, political science schools, right? Community organizations like Carrie Ann's, like we have to come together to think about, you know, I don't really care if you don't like me, but I need systems that make it easy for me to buy the house next to you if that's what I want to do, right? I don't care what you think about my Black son, but I need systems to make it difficult for you to stigmatize him in the classroom, right? And so how do we come together and make some of these structural changes that will actually allow people to thrive and move forward? And we can deal with the interpersonal animus later, or maybe even never, right? But the systems are what really need to be dismantled, because even if everyone had a change of heart, the system would still keep going to exclude the same people every single time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as many of you know who know me, you know I hate talking and I really love actions. You know, people tell me, can you show up and do something? I'm like, that's great, but if we're just gonna keep on talking about things, you know, like I might as well get some wine, margarita, and call this a day. So I would like to talk a little bit more concrete to say that's great. Like I think we can have the conversation. We see we have a mayor locally who's interested in focusing on equity. We have a mayor who's is not, you know, doesn't have a problem with saying racism, you know, that it exists and these are the systems in which it exists and we need to do something about it. We're talking about here about the need for collective impact, that the only way to sort of have transformative change is that we need to have collectively, we need to bring our university folks together, our grassroots folks together, our elected folks together, right, to be able to have collective and much more transformative impact. So the question is, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here so that it's not a conversation only, but that we can say, maybe these are one or two concrete ways that somebody can leave here who's from lots of other schools, right, or other organizations that I see joining us tonight, that we can say these are 2 or 3 concrete steps that we can take to actually have collective impact. So I'm gonna go with you, Professor James, because I see that Carrie Ann is maybe a little frozen, but you know, so we're gonna go with you too until she comes back. Yes.
Yeah, so at the law school, a lot of my colleagues have been thinking about how to turn their research and their thinking, partnering up with community organizations and trying to sort of implement policies. And so I think at a university, that has to be our role. It's very easy to get caught up in, you know, moving towards tenure or what the faculty meeting topic is today, but trying to think of ourselves as doing work that serves who, right? Not each other, but the community in which we sit. And so if you do work in political science, what are the initiatives that are coming out of that department to help think about gerrymandering? Right, at the state level. If you're at the law school, what are we doing about issues of mass incarceration, right? We're thinking about how we train our students differently, but also working with organizations in the community that are trying to push forward reform in terms of policing. What sort of testimony are we giving? What congressional briefs are you supporting? You know, in what ways are you giving organizations talking points, right? Or giving them information about how to navigate the system. So if I hear you right, and the question is, how can academics make contributions? I think it has to be, right, I wrote this article or I did this project, but how do I turn it into something that's more outward facing, right? Did I write an op-ed that helps galvanize people around the issue and lays out some concrete steps that we can take to move forward? Did I find a community organization who would find my research valuable, right? In terms of thinking about what they're doing. You know, I don't think, you know, some people are like, oh, well, you know, are you an activist? I'm like, no, that's not, I'm an academic, right? I write, I teach, but my work can be useful to people who are on the front lines, right? And so how am I using my work to actually inform policy going forward? And, you know, you can do that at different levels, at different stages of your career. But I think that academics really have an obligation to think about that, given the place of the university in a community like Miami. So I don't know if you want to be.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Yeah, okay. I was like, I mean, we could, you know, it's hard to say exactly what people should be doing, but I can say generally, what can you do with this work that gives it life other than, right, the project that you completed and went into your scholarly profile, but can it be turned outward?
But I love that though. I think you've kind of really given some really concrete steps, like from the academic side, and even our students who are here who are paying attention to this conversation, the work that we are doing in the classroom, the reading materials that we're putting forth, right? And the materials that we're writing about, the videos that we're showing in the class can absolutely be relevant to some of these conversations that needs to have a space within the larger community as well. But the other piece that you said, which is really important, is op-ed piece. I think we have an opportunity to bring in some of the research and theories and so forth with what's happening on the ground to create these op-ed pieces, to really show, right, to give it larger life as well. And the other piece that I heard you say, which I think is also really is important, is how do you make your work relevant to the community, like, to the work that's happening. When Carrie Ann is very interested in like women's empowerment and women's, thriving in South Florida. If there's a professor who's doing that kind of work, she gets to use that research to actually make her point as to why this is important and the overall impact that could have. So that kind of partnership would be really, really, really informative and effective.
But I mean, and I'll let Carrie Ann comment on this, but I do want to say that sometimes people tell themselves, oh, the work I do is not relevant to issues of equity. But I would say there is no aspect of intellectual inquiry that is not relevant in some way to issues of equality in our country, right? And so if you think you can't connect your work to a movement out there to make the world better, you're not thinking broadly enough about what it is you do and the discipline in which you're sitting, right? And so really thinking, okay, I do this small piece of this puzzle. How does that connect to larger issues about which I should be informed, right? I don't have to dedicate my research agenda to it, right? But can I dig deeper and think about how this connects? If only it means that I teach better, right? And it helps students understand this is how this is connected to what's going on in the real world in a broader way. And that's really important. That's really important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Carrie Ann, you came right back in, right? You got a good summary, right, of exactly that.
I think I heard a good summary.
Yeah.
So I'm going to answer this question from a place of what I'm trying to do from what we're trying to do at YWCA when it comes to what we consider to be herd immunity against the disease of racism. We believe that every single person, and I said, you said, Dr. James, Professor James? Professor.
Oh, Snooty, it's fine.
It's that from every seat and every corner in which you sit, you have an opportunity to affect a circle of influence. You have a circle of influence. And we each have to educate ourselves. So you want to start with something, you don't know where to start, educate yourself. For example, there's so many amazing resources that are currently available. YWCA is in the middle of our 21-day racial equity and social justice challenge. It is a great way for you to start to unpack systemic racism through the lens of different issues. We're in our education week this week, which is why this panel was so wonderful for us. Educate yourself. You don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. Everyone's lived experience as Black people is different. I'm an immigrant woman. My experience is different from my neighbor's experience. So I don't know everything, but you have a responsibility to educate yourself. You have a responsibility to figure it out. And dear God, you have Google. Go for it. So none of us have any excuses. Second of all, exercise that influence in accountability. Hold those around you accountable to not perpetuating stereotypes. Talk to your employer. What are our policies around equity? How have we, what are what's our data telling us? Have women been promoted into other jobs the way that the way that others in our organization have? What are our systems of creating new pipelines? How are we creating new pipelines so that, we get the representation that we want on the board and the C-suite and in mid-level management? So lots of people have the hiring thing down, right? But when you get in, breaking through from that entry-level management to that middle tier is still somehow elusive. So use and exercise your personal influence within your workplace, within your home, within your church, within your community, with your girlfriends, with your family. Exercise that. And then finally, get uncomfortable and get others a little uncomfortable also. So long as we remember that racism is a construct, a power dynamic. It is most people, unless you're way over here at the bell curve, don't identify as such and really don't try to behave as such. But as we said here tonight before, the system's perpetuated even if we are the best people in our hearts. So once you become aware, you then have to become uncomfortable and put yourself in new situations. Make sure that you're opening doors for other people. Spend time in different places that you usually spend time with. Make a lunch date with that coworker that you thought, because you had a image in your head of what must be going on in her life or his life because they show up the way that they do. Try to understand that. So even if you don't have big systemic responses and research and all this kind of, you know, if you don't have the power that you feel that you do, recognize that you do, because South Florida is made up of people who've always been gritty, and we've never backed down from a challenge, right? And we can do this. So if we build enough immunity amongst us as South Floridians to kind of starve out what we don't want to see in our community, we're going to be able to control that disease of racism. But we got to get up to a bench. We're not there yet, right? We've got to build that bench. So, and that's the responsibility of every single person at the table to create that from the C, me as a CEO, you as professors, researchers, as a mayor, you know, every single one of us, students, you have a responsibility to act in a way that we can't, you know. So what is that? Exercise that.
I love it. I love it. I love urban immunity. I think we should get t-shirts, right? I think, I think we should get t-shirts, right? That's focusing on transformative change, that says we need to build our immunity, right? As we are really battling all of this. I really, really appreciate your responses, because it allows us to recognize that there's some things that we can do at micro level. There's some things we can do at macro level as well. But whatever it is, we all have a role to play in the transformative change that we need to see desperately in our communities. One of the things we know, which is the reasons why we were very, very determined to have this conversation here tonight, and that is change is needed. Like, change is needed, and that is the time is now more than ever, that we cannot get back to being comfortable anymore, that we can't go back, right, and get comfortable, continue to be comfortable in the situation. As you say, Karen, we have to continue to be uncomfortable. Right now that we are aware, we have to learn how to sit with that uncomfortableness, because it is in that uncomfortableness that we will begin to see the kind of changes that we really need to be able to see. So really appreciate your perspectives on that. So we have 5 more minutes. So I'm going to ask you to final thoughts that you may have for our students who are here. We have community organizers who are here. We have professors who are here. We have a few people who are in elected seats here, joining us this evening. Your final thoughts around this theme of time for change that you would like to impart on art and everybody tonight. Professor James.
That's a big order. I think that everyone needs to get focused on structures. And I think the conversation around equality over the last 20 years has been about individual bias, interpersonal bias, even unconscious bias. And I actually have come to think that it's a distraction. I think diversity, that phrase, is a distraction, right? We don't need diversity, we need justice. Those are two different things. And justice requires structural solutions. And so whatever your expertise is, whatever your passion project is, whatever your area of interest is, find the ways in which there are structures built into that area, that discipline, that topic, that are keeping people out. Look around you and notice who is not in the room with me, who is not in these spaces with me, who is not getting access to what I'm getting, and think about the structures that make it so, right? And sort of, I wouldn't say forget sort of the interpersonal work, because that's important, but really that's structural change. And you have to take responsibility for structural change among many aspects of your life. It's not just about being able to talk about it. How are you voting? In what ways do you vote in ways that are going to push us towards structural reform, right? Who are you pushing for changes at your workplace? Are you pushing, what schooling choices are you making for your children? Right? What socializing patterns are you engaged in, right? If you're part of an institution, ask them, what are you doing about structures? What policies do we have in place here that keep some people away from this resource that I'm enjoying now? And that is everyone's work. That is everyone's obligation. Justice is not passive. It is not just an ambition. It is actual work that we all have to do every day. And you're responsible for some piece of it. You have to go out. You have to do that work. Find the structures and work to start changing them.
Love it, love it. I love it. So she said, I don't know if you guys got it, but she said, we don't need diversity, we need
Justice.
justice, people,
Justice.
justice. And that really begins with making sure that we have structural change, right? Structural change as well, and that we have to go and get it. So we can't sit by the sideline. This is not a parade that we get to pull a chair and sit by the side and watch this parade go, right? But we realize that we have a role to play in making sure that we get this one done. So I really appreciate that. So Carrie Ann, get to take us home, girl. Take us home.
Justice is not a spectator sport. That's what I heard, right? It's active. I think, for the students who I would want to address right now, and I think young people are just such an exciting group for so many reasons. I know I have the disease of ageism. I am the age that I am, and the language of globalization that young people have is so refreshing, and it has always been refreshing. The fact that young people come with this built-in kind of untethered yet educated, especially college students, optimism about the world that can be. College students and young people don't have all the responsibilities we have built upon ourselves by the time we get to a certain age, right? So you're in that job and you don't want to rock the boat. You're, in that seat and you don't want to get this person upset, or you have responsibilities of your family and you don't want to jeopardize that. But you have this early sense of the world and all of the bandwidth before you get tied down to the weights of all this stuff we've weighted ourselves down with, to really lean into change and to lean into asking tough questions and to not give up on that idealism that you have. So play your space, really show up during the time that you get to do this. There's kind of a shelf life on it. So don't waste it. Get involved, learn, activate, ask questions, challenge others, create accountability, and just recognize you're in a very, very unique, beautiful time in your life.
Mic drop. Mic drop there. There it is, right? There it is, right? Awesome, awesome, right? So really, really, I think quite a powerful message. And while you are directing that to some of our students and at all level, our undergraduate or graduate students here at the university, that same message resonates for our high school kids, right? Our middle school students as well, but it also resonates for all of us, right? And so the focus for us this evening was the opportunity to be able to say, while there are a lot of changes happening and we are celebrating and we're looking to be in good spaces about these changes. We have the first woman mayor, elected here. We have our first vice president, elected woman, right? So all of those are really exciting and we want to be excited about them, but we have to recognize that there's work that needs to be done. Right, that we have work that needs to be done, and this work begins with this, collaboration, so we can have a collective impact in terms of the work. So I want to say thank you so much to both of you for being here. Thank you to our school and for our amazing dean, Dean Cornwood, for always having the vision of wanting to focus on equity, focusing on justice at the school level, bringing in our partners, our friends throughout the campus and the community to be a central part of the conversation tonight. We want to say thank you to all of you for joining us, for being here. A special, special thank you to our amazing behind the scene team who do everything, put the flyers together and everything else, and set us up. So I want to say a special thank you to all of us. Let us go because the work continues. The work is now. So it is time for us to go. So thank you all for being here and have an awesome, awesome evening. Be safe.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.